Today, you're going to learn everything you need to know regarding middleware in Next.js. We're first going to go over a review of the Next.js docs just to get an idea of how middleware works, what it is, and how you can use it within Next.js. And then we'll get into our own example, diving into VS Code a bit in a demo application of actually implementing some middleware and kind of talking about some use cases in which you might actually use it. So first up here, what is middleware? Well, according to the Next.js docs, middleware allows you to run code before a request is completed. Then, based on the incoming request, you can modify the response by rewriting, redirecting, modifying the request or response headers, or responding directly. So we know what software is, but middleware is effectively software that runs in the middle of a certain process. So in the case of a request, you might start the request, but before that request is completely completed, meaning the request has been resolved with certain data or something like that, it is all completed, we run some software in the middle of that process. And that is what middleware is. Allows you to run some code before a request is completed. And I kind of like to think about it in terms of middleware is basically a way to kind of wrap your request around like a tunnel for your request to go through. And then as it's going through that tunnel, you can kind of do some different things with that request, like triggering a redirect or adjusting the headers or cookies or something like that, depending on what your request is. Okay, so you have the start of the request, and then you open up this middleware tunnel for the request to go through before that request is all completed. And this will make more sense once we get to the actual kind of demo here towards the end and you see it in the code. At least that's what helps me the most. So in Next.js, the way that you can create middleware is similar to how you create other things in Next.js, whether it is different routes in Next.js or different pages in Next.js or different layouts or stuff like that. You create a file. So it's kind of this like file-based middleware system in which you can create a middleware TS or JS file in the root of your project application to define middleware. And then you just export a function from that file. Now, one important thing to remember here is that this should be at the root of your project. So at the same level as like your app directory, assuming you're using the new app router. This would also be at the same root level as like your pages or SRC directory, potentially if you're not using the app router. Okay. And then once you create your middleware.ts or JS file, you then can export a middleware function from that file, just like what they're doing here. And that function will automatically be passed your request. So middleware, it runs kind of during the completion of our request before it's all done. So you're kind of past that request. And then depending on that request, you can perform a redirect. So here, this is them performing a redirect, or you can set different cookies and headers, which we'll talk about in a second as well. Now, one thing that you might see here as well is them using this config, and it has a matcher property. So let's talk about matching paths. So we kind of want a way to decide when we want our middleware to run. Like, we might not want our middleware to run on just every single request that occurs in our application. Maybe we only want our middleware to run when a user tries to go to our about page, or if our user tries to make a post to our save posts endpoint. We might only want to run our middleware in those cases. But if they just go to our homepage, maybe we don't want to run our middleware. So the way that you can kind of decide when your middleware runs is you can use a matcher or you can use conditionals. So we will touch on the matcher and conditionals in a second, but before we get to that, let's talk about like the default behavior of middleware here. So as it says here, middleware will be invoked for every route in your project. The following is the execution order, and I'm not going to read this off. You can come look at this within the docs. But you can see here that there is an execution order for the invocation of your middleware. And this could matter depending on your use case. And then, as I mentioned earlier, there are two ways to define what paths or what routes your middleware will be applied to. So if you do a certain request to your about page or to your blog page, do you want your middleware to run on those requests? Well, you can use either a custom matcher config or conditional statements, as I mentioned. So for your matcher config, from your middleware file, you can export a constant called config. And for that constant, it's going to be an object, and you can set a matcher property on that object to the paths that you want your middleware to run on. Okay. So right here, they're setting the matcher property to a string /about/:path star. So that is saying that I want you to run my middleware on all of my paths within my about directory, or all routes within my about route segment here. And it goes on, you can match multiple paths by passing in an array to your matcher property, exporting from your config object from your middleware.js or TS file. So here, this would say, I want my middleware to run on my about route segments as well as my dashboard route segments. So that's what they're doing up here in this example. They're exporting a config object from this middleware file right below their middleware function. And they're saying in this, they want to run it on their about route segments. And then with the matcher config, you can also use different regex. So if you're really good with regex or that fits your use case best, then you can also use regex as your matcher for what you pass in here. And then one kind of good things to know regarding the matcher is that these need to be constants. They cannot be dynamic values. Those will be ignored. So you shouldn't use like variables within your matcher. Now, for your matchers, they must start with a /. They can include named parameters. So about /:path, that matches /about /a /about /b, but it does not match about /a /c. But if you do want that behavior, then if you use this :path syntax, then you would want to use a star following it. And that will match a /b /c, because the star is 0 or more. Okay, so you can use these different kind of regex symbols to match certain paths. And then you can use regular expressions enclosed in parentheses instead of like this certain syntax right here. Okay, so I'll just consult the docs for coming up with your matchers here. It should be pretty straightforward to find what you're kind of looking for. But what you need to know is that you can use this exported matcher object to match certain paths in which you want your middleware to run on. It's like saying, for these specific routes, I want to create my tunnel in which my request is going to pass through my middleware function here. And then you can also use conditional statements. So here in this example, they're saying, okay, if the URL path name starts with about, then I want to return this response, or I actually want to rewrite my URL to be about -2. But if my URL path name starts with /dashboard, then I'm going to rewrite it to /dashboard /user. So here you can also use conditional statements within your middleware rather than using like a matcher object for those use cases. Now, you can also use the Next response API. We've talked about this a little bit before in my route handlers videos, but this can be used to perform redirects, rewrites. It can be used to set cookies, set headers, and a whole bunch of kind of different things there. And then for using the cookies, you can do this in a pretty straightforward manner in which you're automatically going to be passed your request from your middleware function. So your request is automatically going to be passed as an argument to your function parameters here. And you can access your cookies by doing request.cookies.get. And you can pass in the kind of key of the cookie that you want to get. And then you can use those cookies. You can say whether your cookie has a certain key within it. You can delete cookies, and then you can also set cookies. So from your next response, you can call the .next method, and that's going to return a response. And then for that response, you can set different cookies. So this is effectively allowing you to adjust this to allow you to set different cookies from within your middleware. And then you can also do a very similar thing with headers, in which you can create your request headers here, and then you can set different headers by saying request headers.set, and then you can use next response to create a new response. And then within your request object of your response, you can set the new headers that you've created from within your middleware. So I don't think the syntax here is particularly important, but what I do think is important is for you to know that within your middleware, you can use it to set your different cookies and headers, and it's pretty easy to do if you just kind of consult the docs here. But you can also produce a response. So you can respond from middleware directly by returning a response or next response. So here in this example, what they're showing is like, okay, if the user is not authenticated here, then they're not even going to wait for this request to kind of pass along to our different API routes or whatever it is. We're just going to return a response directly with returning a new next response here. And then they're just going to say a success property is false. The message is authentication failed. And then they're going to return a status of 401 and also some different headers here. So you can return a response directly here. And I think for authentication purposes, this could be super useful. All right. So that is kind of the TLDR of how middleware works within Next.js and some different things you can do with it. But now let's go to VS Code here and let's create just a little demo application here. So I'm going to go ahead and do npx create next app latest. And I'm going to just call this middleware. I'm not going to use TypeScript just for the sake of this. I want it to be focused on middleware and not on TypeScript. We are going to use the app router, but everything else we're just going to say no for there. So this is going to create a new project, and then I'm just going to go to File, Open, and open this project within VS Code. So now I have my new project here, and all I'm going to do is let's first create our middleware file. So for this, just like I said earlier, this needs to be within the root of your application. So on the same level as our app directory here, and also on the same level as this like next.config.js and so on and so forth. So I'm just going to create a new file here, and then I'm going to call it middleware.js. And then for this, let's go ahead and take a look at the docs here. And for my middleware, I'm going to just copy this right here. Now this is in TypeScript, so I'm going to have to remove this next request type that you can get from Next, and then remove that type annotation because type annotations don't make sense in JavaScript. And then we're just going to console log our request here. Okay. And I'm going to keep this imported here because we're going to use the next response here in just a second. So I'm currently not defining a matcher, nor am I conditionally console logging this request. So theoretically, for any path that I go to within my project, then I should see me console logging that request. Because if I go to /about, then the browser is going to make a GET request to generate the page for that about path. So before we go to that, let's create a couple different pages here. So we have some different routes that we can navigate to. So within my app directory, I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to just call this blog, and I'm going to do a new file, page.js, and then let's export default function blog page. And I'm going to return an H1. And sorry, I just like the JSX icons better than the JS one. So we're going to do blog page, and then I'm going to return. And I also get my like abbreviations that way if it's JSX. So I'm going to return an H1 that just says blog page. And then let's do a very similar thing, except we will do a login page. I'm going to need a new file, page.jsx, export default function login page. I'm going to return an H1 that just says login page. All right. So I've just created a couple different routes that I should be able to access at /blog. I should see just a blog page, /login. I should see just a login page here. And of course, my home page is going to be this default generated Next.js page. And when I go to all those pages, I should see within my console here a consoled out request object. So let's go ahead and do npm run dev. So I'm running this at localhost 3000 here. And I should be able to go back to my application at localhost 3000. I should be able to refresh it here. So I do indeed have my app, and I should be able to go, I think I named it blog. So I see my blog page, and just accessing this blog page, let's go back, and we do indeed see that I get a request here, and we can see that we can access the cookies here. We can see the different like port. We can also see like what the URL is. We can see different information about the request. It was a GET request here, and so on and so forth. So we are console logging this request here. And if I add some return statements here, and then I go to my login page, we should still see a additional request. And we do see another request here because we now accessed our login page. So we now are making a GET request to our /login. As we see, method is GET. So we are running our middleware or passing our requests through our middleware here on all of our different routes that we're trying to access. So now how about let's perform a redirect if they try to access the blog page if they are not logged in. And all we're going to do for if they are not logged in is create a constant called logged in. And I'm going to set that to false. And you could imagine that you could get this data from your database, or this could be like is authenticated or something like that. And maybe do a function that reaches out to the database and sees if they're authenticated, or you're using that state in some different way. For the sake of just showing you how middleware works, we're just going to use a constant called logged in here. So with that, what I'm also going to need to do is I'm going to have to create a matcher here, because if they are not logged in and they access the blog page, I'm going to want to perform a redirect to the login page. But I don't want my middleware to run when they land on my login page, because they're still not going to be logged in. But then I don't want to just like redirect them to my login page, see that they're not logged in, redirect them to my login page. It just gets stuck in an infinite loop there. So let's define our matcher here to only run this middleware when we go to our about page. So let's go back to the docs here, and let's go back up to the matcher, and I'm going to export const config, and we're going to go back. We're going to export const config. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just do /blog, which is effectively saying that I want to match anything within my blog page. So let's first make sure that this is working, and then we'll perform the redirect logic here. So let me just go to localhost 3000 here. Let's open our console, and I'm going to add a bunch of return statements under compiled successfully so we can see this. And if I refresh this page, I should not see my request console logged, because I am now just matching my blog page. But if we go to my blog page at /blog, I should see my request here, which I do indeed see, because it's trying to access my blog page, which you can also see at localhost /blog right here within the URL. So if I add some more return statements and I try to access my login page, I should not see a request, and I do not see a request. So I am currently only matching my blog route here because of me exporting this config. So that should be a pretty good example of how this works here. But now let's add some logic here to where I'll say if they are not logged in. Let's now perform a redirect in which we redirect them back to the login page. And I think what I need to do here is next response dot redirect. And I think I can just do login. And I think I need to add a second argument here, but I forget which argument I need to send. So let's go back here. And I think they do this in their example here. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to copy this. You need to do redirect. And then you're just going to pass one argument that is going to be a new URL. So let me copy this and I'm going to paste this here, but I'm going to return a next response. And I'm going to redirect to my login page here. So it's going to create a new URL using my next URL, but it's going to redirect it to my login page. So if they're not logged in and I try to access the blog page, then perform a redirect here. Let's go back to my home page here. Okay, so I can still access my home page without any redirect, even when I'm not logged in, which is okay. But if I try to access /blog, you see that I'm immediately redirected to my login page because I'm not logged in. Now, if I am logged in, then I should be able to access my blog page and I should not get redirected at this point. So if I go /blog now, you see I do access my blog page. So my middleware, we're passing this request through my kind of middleware tunnel to continue that potentially poor analogy, but we're passing it through that tunnel, but then we're kind of seeing, okay, they are not logged in. Let's redirect them to my login page. All right. Now let's do one more example here in which we return a response directly. So to do this, I'm going to create a new route here. So I'm going to do a new folder, API, and then I'm going to do a new route called save. Actually, I'm going to do another new folder within API called save post. And then within my save post folder, I'm going to create a route.js file and I'm going to export async function. And I might forget a little bit of the syntax here. Export async function post. And all I'm going to do here is I need to return a next response from next.server. And I think I want to do .json and then set a message as successfully saved post. And let me consult the docs here again, just to make sure my syntax is correct for this route handler. And the way that I'm going to do this is I'm going to go to this route handlers, export async function post, return next response.json. And yeah, so this should work here. So I've effectively just created a new route handler here in which if someone successfully makes a post request to API /save post, I should get a message successfully saved post. So now I want to create let's just create a button that makes a post request to this endpoint. So within my app, I'm going to create a new components folder. And then since this is going to be a client component, I am going to make sure to use the use client string at the top of this file. So let's just call this save post button for the sake of example. And then at the top of the file, like I said, we're going to use client. And then I'm going to export default function, save post button. And then we're just going to return a button that says save post, but we're going to create a handle click function. So function, and it's going to be an async function, handle click, in which what we're going to do here is we're going to say const res is equal to, we're going to await a fetch request that we're going to make to our own endpoint. So this is going to be /API. And if you haven't seen my route handlers video, that will give you more context on how this endpoint is working within my route.js file. But we're going to make a request to /API /save post. And for our options of this fetch request, we're going to say method is equal to a post request. And then we're going to say const data is going to equal await res.json. And then we're going to console log the data here. And then for my buttons on click, it's going to be this handle click function. So here's our button, and let's just render this within my page.js file. So if I do my save post button and I render that within my page.js, so just my homepage here, and then we should now be able to make a post by just clicking on this button. And let's go back to our middleware here for a sec. So right now, I don't want to use any of this. We're just going to return a response here if needed. So I'm going to keep if not logged in, but I'm going to keep this for true for now. So I'm just going to console log my request, and this is never going to be accessed because this is going to stay true. So let's go ahead and make a post to our save post function. And you can see that this is going to run our middleware when we run this save post function. So let's go back to our homepage here, and the middleware just ran again because I just went back to my homepage. So let's add some return statements again. And if I do, before I do that, let's open up the console. If I do save post, you see I get data that is successfully saved post. So I hit my own API endpoint and it just returned successfully saved post. And then I consoled that out within my save post button. So that is working. And then if I look at this, you see my middleware did run here, and I should be able to see that my method was a post request. And then I made this request to my API /save post function. So my middleware is running. So now let's say if they are not logged in, let's just return a response directly saying that they are not logged in, and let's return like a 404 or something. So let's go to producing a response directly. And this is exactly what I want to do here. So instead of is not authenticated, which you could also very well do, I'm going to just say if is not logged in, and then I'm going to return this next response here. So let's go back here. And then instead of returning this redirect here, we're going to return a new response, which is a next response in which success is false, message is authentication failed, status is 401. And then I'm going to set this to if not logged in. So if everything is working correctly here, they should make this post request, but it should fail because they're not logged in, because we probably don't want them saving data in our database if they're indeed not logged in. So I'm going to add a bunch of return statements so we can see this in our middleware a little easier. But now and I'm going to clear my console, but if I click on it now, I see I get a 401 unauthorized. My data is now success is false, message is authentication failed. So this is my middleware directly returning this response saying, hey, you're not logged in, so you can't make a post request here. And if I look at my middleware, you see I do console log my request here as well. So that, my friends, is how middleware works in Next.js. That is how you can perform redirects or return responses directly. And we also saw some examples in the docs of setting cookies, headers, and all that stuff. So hopefully you learned a bunch from this video, and I will see you in that next one.